I remember the mountain trail. Before, I remember the fear. It began as a quiet walk meant to clear my thoughts. The air was cool, thin enough that every breath felt borrowed from the sky itself. Pine trees leaned inward like silent witnesses, their needles whispering whenever the wind moved through them. Somewhere far below, a river hummed softly, hidden by fog that rolled across the slopes like slow-moving smoke. I wasn't alone, not exactly. Other hikers had passed earlier in the day, boot prints pressed into damp soil, a forgotten scarf tied to a branch, the faint smell of someone's campfire lingering long after they were gone, proof that people came here. But by evening, the trail belonged only to sound and shadow. My flashlight flickered as the sun sank behind the ridgeline. The path narrowed, twisting between stones older than memory. Every step felt slightly delayed, as if the mountain waited before allowing me forward. That was when I noticed something strange. The trail markers had changed. The painted symbols on the trees no longer matched the map in my pocket. Arrows pointed deeper into the forest, fresh markings layered over faded ones. Someone or something had redirected the path. I told myself it was maintenance work, a harmless mistake. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful, matching my pace exactly. When I turned around, the trail was empty, and that's when I saw it, standing farther up the path where no one should have been. I reached the trail just after morning fog began lifting from the valley. The parking lot was nearly empty. Cold air rested against my face, thin and clean, carrying the smell of wet pine and old earth. Somewhere far away, a bird called once, then stopped, as if interrupted mid-thought. The path ahead looked familiar. I had walked it before. Same wooden archway, same narrow line of dirt, winding between trees older than memory. But something felt pause. The ground had been busy with movement. Insects shifting beneath leaves, branches swaying, distant wings brushing the air. Instead, the forest held itself perfectly still. Even my breathing sounded louder than it should. I stepped forward. Gravel pressed beneath my boots, sharp and deliberate. The noise echoed longer than expected, stretching into the trees before fading slowly, too slowly. Someone had been here recently. Fresh boot prints marked the soil ahead, clear edges, damp impressions still dark with moisture. A hiker must have passed only minutes before me, yet the trail looked untouched. No broken twigs, no drifting dust, no lingering warmth of human presence. Just prints, waiting. I followed them. The trees leaned closer as the path narrowed. Their branches formed soft arches overhead, filtering pale light into thin stripes across the ground. Every few steps, I expected to hear conversation ahead. A backpack zipper, a cough. Nothing came. Silence replaced everything. Even the wind disappeared. Halfway up the incline, a wooden trail sign stood beside the path. I remember it clearly, an old marker pointing toward two routes. It moved, not much, just a slow creak, with shifting against its post. I stopped walking. The sign swayed gently, groaning as though pushed by wind. But the air around me remained perfectly still. Leaves hung motionless. Loose dirt lay undisturbed. The creaking continued, soft, rhythmic, almost patient. I stepped closer, placing a hand against the wood. It felt cold, colder than the surrounding air, damp like something left in shade for too long. The movement stopped instantly. The forest held its breath with me. I pulled my hand away, and the sign creaked again. Behind me this time. I turned quickly. The trail stretched empty in both directions. No hikers, no animals, only pale morning light and rows of silent trees. When I faced forward again, my stomach tightened. New footprints marked the ground ahead. They hadn't been there before. Fresh impressions appeared one by one along the dirt path. Left, then right, forming slowly as if invisible boots pressed into soil. I watched the earth sink beneath unseen weight. A step formed, then another. They continued forward, leading deeper into the forest. My breath fogged in front of me despite the warming sun. I told myself someone was just ahead, hidden by the bend in the trail, that there had to be a person creating them. But the timing felt wrong. The prints appeared only when I looked directly at them. When I glanced away, the movement stopped. The trail felt aware. I walked again, slower now, matching the pace of the forming steps. Each time my boot touched the ground, another print appeared several feet ahead, guiding me forward like a quiet invitation. The forest remained unnaturally calm. No rustling branches, no insects humming. Even the distant river seemed muted, its usual roar softened into a low, steady hush. I became aware of my own presence in a way I never had before, as if something studied how I moved, how I breathed, how long I hesitated before each step. The air grew cooler beneath thicker trees. Light faded into gray tones, and the path curved gently around a cluster of stones. I stopped again. The footprints stopped too, waiting. A pressure settled in my chest. Not fear exactly, but the feeling of being noticed after thinking you were alone. I turned slowly in a full circle. Nothing moved, yet the silence felt crowded, like unseen listeners standing just beyond sight. I whispered without meaning to. "Hello." My voice barely carried beyond my lips. The word dissolved into the air, absorbed immediately by the forest. No echo returned, only the faint creak of the wooden sign far behind me, though it should have been too distant to hear. The footprints resumed, one more step forming ahead, then another. They led toward a darker stretch of trail, where fog gathered between trunks like low drifting smoke. I hesitated at the edge. The ground there looked untouched again, smooth soil, undisturbed leaves. For a moment, I considered turning back. The thought felt heavy, resisted, not by fear, by the trail itself. I realized something slowly, the way understanding arrives without warning. The path wasn't guiding me somewhere. It was waiting to see if I would continue. The mountain didn't feel empty. It felt observant, patient. I stepped forward into the fog. Behind me, my own footprints faded quicker than they should have, edges softening as if erased by invisible hands. Ahead, new ones appeared, always just beyond reach, leading me deeper, and for the first time, I understood the quiet truth settling around me like cold mist. I wasn't walking the trail. The trail was watching me walk. By late morning, the fog had thinned into long, pale ribbons drifting between the trees. Sunlight touched the trail carefully, as if unsure it was welcome there. I walked for hours without passing another person. The forest remained quiet, not peaceful, just absent. No insects traced the air. No birds crossed the sky above the branches. Only my footsteps followed me. Eventually, the path widened into a small clearing. A map board stood at its center. I remembered it from previous hikes. A large wooden frame covered by cracked glass, meant to help travelers choose their routes before climbing higher into the mountain. Relief settled in my chest. Something familiar, something normal. I stepped closer. The map was faded almost white, colors washed away by years of weather. Trail lines crossed the mountain in thin, winding paths, each marked with symbols and numbers. But many of them had been scratched out, deep lines carved through entire routes. Not weather damage, deliberate marks. Someone had taken time to erase paths one by one. Only a few trails remained visible, and one in particular caught my attention. A red line. It ran deeper into the mountain than any other trail, disappearing near the highest ridge. Unlike the others, it looked freshly painted. Too fresh. The paint almost shone beneath the dull light. Behind me, gravel shifted softly. I turned. An elderly hiker stood near the edge of the clearing. I hadn't heard him approach. He wore an old green jacket and carried no backpack, only a walking stick worn smooth by years of use. His face held the calm expression of someone who had spent too long outdoors. He glanced at the map, not at me, then quietly said, "Don't follow red." His voice sounded dry, almost tired. I waited for him to explain, but he didn't. He simply stared at the board, eyes lingering on the bright red trail. I asked which path was safe. He shook his head slowly. They changed. The words settled strangely in the air. Before I could respond, he turned and walked back into the trees. His steps made almost no noise. Within seconds, the forest swallowed him completely. I stood alone again. The clearing felt colder now. I leaned closer to the map. Some trail names no longer matched what I remembered. Sections of the mountain appeared rearranged, Ridges drawn where valleys should be, paths curving in impossible directions, and the red trail, it seemed longer than before. I blinked. The line stretched slightly farther across the board, reaching toward areas that had previously been blank. A faint scraping noise came from behind the glass. I froze. The sound stopped immediately. When I looked again, another trail had been crossed out. Fresh scratches marred the surface, pale with exposed beneath faded paint. I stepped back. The forest watched in silence. Wind should have moved through the clearing. Yet the air remained perfectly still. Even the hanging corner of the map didn't sway. Something felt wrong with staying there. I chose a direction, one marked with an old blue symbol, and continued walking. The trail narrowed again as trees closed around me. After several minutes, I noticed the first marker nailed to a trunk, a small square sign painted red. I frowned. That symbol had been blue on the map. Maybe I remembered incorrectly. I kept walking. Another marker appeared. Red again. Then another, each one identical. Bright, fresh, unfaded. A slow unease crept into my chest. I checked my pocket map. The path I followed should have been marked blue the entire way. But every tree ahead carried red paint. I turned around, expecting to see the blue markers behind me. They were red too. All of them. Even the ones I had already passed. My breath shortened. The elderly hiker's warning returned quietly. Don't follow red. I stepped off the trail slightly, examining a nearby tree. Beneath the red paint, faint traces of blue showed through. Older markings buried beneath a newer layer, as if the trail had been rewritten. A faint creak echoed somewhere behind me. Not wood, not branches. Something deeper, like the mountain shifting its weight. The path ahead curved sharply downhill. I hesitated. For a moment, I considered turning back toward the clearing. But when I looked behind me, the trail no longer resembled the one I came from. Trees stood closer together. Shadows thicker, markers glowing faintly red in the dim light. Every direction looked the same. Every choice already made. The mountain had quietly rearranged the way forward. I continued walking. The red markers guided me deeper, appearing at perfect intervals. Never too far apart, never allowing doubt to last long enough to stop. Somewhere along the trail, I realized something unsettling. I hadn't chosen this route. The route had chosen me. And as the trees darkened around me, I began to understand a map board wasn't there to help hikers navigate the mountain. It existed to show which paths were no longer allowed to leave. Dusk arrived faster than expected. One moment the forest glowed with pale afternoon light. The next, shadows stretched across the trail like long fingers pulling night closer. The temperature dropped suddenly. My breath turned visible again, drifting slowly in front of me before fading into gray air. I kept walking. Stopping felt wrong. The red trail markers appeared darker now, almost wet against the bark of trees. They reflected the last light of evening, guiding me forward through narrowing turns. That was when I heard the footsteps. Soft, measured, directly behind me. I assumed another hiker had caught up. Relief flickered briefly through my chest. Human presence felt welcome after hours of isolation. I slowed slightly, expecting them to pass. The footsteps slowed too, perfectly matched. I stopped walking. The footsteps continued. 1 step, 2, 3. They approached slowly, then stopped just a few feet behind me. I turned around. The trail lay empty. No movement. No figure emerging from the trees. Only fading light and rows of silent trunks disappearing into shadow. I waited, listening. Nothing followed. After a moment, I laughed quietly to myself. Nerves, exhaustion, imagination. I began walking again. The footsteps returned instantly. Same rhythm. Same distance behind me. I stopped sharply. They did not. The steps continued forward, closing the space between us until they halted just behind my shoulder. I felt it then. Breath, not touching me, but present, warm against cold air. I turned again. Empty trail. The silence felt heavier now, almost crowded. Branches above me trembled slightly, though no wind moved through them. Darkness gathered between trees, filling spaces that daylight once occupied. I walked faster. The unseen walker matched me. Gravel crunched behind me with steady patience. My pulse rose. I tried an experiment, stepping suddenly off the trail into thick grass. My movement made almost no noise. The footsteps remained on the path. Continuing forward, passing the spot where I had stood moments earlier, I watched invisible steps press into the dirt, forming fresh impressions exactly like those from earlier that morning. They moved ahead without hesitation, as if unaware I had stopped following. The realization chilled me. Whatever walked behind me only moved when I walked. When ignored, I stepped back onto the trail. Immediately, the footsteps resumed behind me again. Waiting, following, night settled fully across the mountain. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through darkness, illuminating floating dust and drifting mist. Outside the light, shadows fell alive. Several times I spun around quickly, trying to catch movement. Each time, the forest froze. Shadows paused mid-shape. Branches hung perfectly still. The footsteps stopped whenever I searched for them. But the moment I faced forward, they returned, patient, unseen, accompanying me deeper into the mountain. Breathing echoed faintly from somewhere among the trees, not hostile, just present, like another traveler unwilling to be acknowledged. I realized slowly that fear made it stronger. When I focused on the trail ahead, the presence softened. When I listened for it, the forest grew tense again. So I kept walking, pretending I was alone. The footsteps followed faithfully, never touching me, never falling behind. Companionship without form. By the time darkness fully swallowed the sky, I understood the rule without anyone speaking it aloud. Something walked this trail with me, but it existed only when ignored. And the moment I truly turned to face it, the mountain went completely silent. Night settled heavily over the mountain. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I walked, catching drifting fog and thin branches that looked like reaching hands before dissolving into ordinary shapes. The footsteps behind me faded sometime after midnight. I didn't notice exactly when, only that the absence felt louder than their presence had been. The trail dipped gently downhill, opening into another clearing. A wooden rest shelter stood there. Relief washed through me. A simple structure, slanted roof, open walls, benches built along the sides, designed for tired hikers to wait out rain or darkness. Warm light glowed faintly inside. I approached cautiously. 2 metal mugs sat on a small table. Steam rose from them in thin spirals, carrying the scent of tea. Fresh blankets were folded neatly on a bench. Someone had been here seconds ago. "Hello," I called softly. My voice dissolved into the clearing. No answer came. The warmth inside the shelter felt real. I touched one mug. Heat pressed against my palm, comforting and immediate. The tea was still hot. A backpack rested against the wall, unzipped. A pair of boots stood beside it, laces loose as if their owner planned to return any moment. But the forest beyond the shelter remained empty. No footsteps approached. No branches moved. Only quiet. I sat down slowly, letting the warmth settle into my cold hands. A journal lay open on the table. Its pages were filled with handwriting, dozens of entries written by different people. Short notes, dates spanning years. Stayed the night. Warm shelter. Good rest before continuing. The tone changed deeper into the journal. Still here. Trail feels longer leaving than arriving. Morning hasn't come yet. My throat tightened. The final entry read, "Guests always stay longer than planned." The ink looked fresh. A faint creak echoed from outside. I looked toward the trail. Darkness pressed against the edge of the clearing, like a wall. Night felt thicker here. I checked my watch. Only minutes had passed since arriving. Yet exhaustion weighed on me as if hours had slipped away unnoticed. I leaned back briefly, just to rest, just for a moment. The forest grew quieter. My eyes closed. I woke suddenly. Cold air brushed my face. Gray morning light filled the clearing. I sat upright, confused. The shelter was gone. No roof overhead. No benches. No mugs. Only open ground covered in dew. I stood slowly. Grass lay flattened where the structure should have been. A faint square outline marked the earth. Nothing more. No footprints surrounded it. No signs anyone had ever built anything there. The journal was gone. The warmth was gone. Even the smell of tea had vanished. Only the trail remained, stretching forward between silent trees. For a long time, I stood there, tried to understand how something so real could disappear without leaving a trace. Then I noticed something else. New footprints waited ahead on the path. Not mine, not yesterday's. Fresh, patient, as if whoever used the shelter had already continued walking. And without thinking, I followed. Morning arrived pale and quiet. The trail climbed higher along the ridge, where trees thinned and cold wind moved freely again. For the first time since entering the mountain, I heard sound return, distant air sliding across stone, loose gravel shifting beneath my boots. It almost felt normal. Almost. The path curved toward an overlook I remembered from old hiking guides. A wide opening where the forest dropped suddenly into a deep valley below. That was where I saw him. A man stood at the edge of the cliff, perfectly still. He faced the valley, hands resting loosely at his sides, coat unmoving despite the steady wind passing through the overlook. I slowed my steps. Something about his posture felt unnatural. Not tense, not relaxed. Just fixed, like a photograph placed into the landscape. Other hikers appeared along the trail behind me. The first people I had seen in hours. They walked quietly, eyes lowered as they passed the overlook. None of them looked at the man, not even once. One woman adjusted her backpack straps and walked faster, gaze fixed firmly on the ground. Another hiker paused briefly, then turned away before his eyes could reach the figure. Everyone avoided him. The silence around the man felt deliberate. I stepped closer. Wind moved through my jacket, cold and sharp, yet his coat remained completely still. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. He didn't respond, not even a shift of breath. I moved a few steps nearer, careful not to startle him near the cliff edge. Fog rolled slowly upward from the valley, swallowing parts of the landscape below. The man stood just at the border where stone met empty air. Something felt wrong with approaching further. Still, curiosity pulled me forward. I reached the place where he should have been standing. The cliff edge lay empty. No footsteps marked the dirt. No sign anyone had stood there at all. The valley stretched endlessly below, quiet and gray beneath rising fog. I turned confused. The trail behind me remained empty too. The hikers who had passed moments earlier were gone. Only wind moved now. Unease settled deeply in my chest. I pulled out my phone and took a photograph of the overlook, proof that I had been there, that I hadn't imagined the encounter. The camera clicked softly. For a moment, everything felt ordinary again. I continued walking. Hours later, during a rest break beneath tall pines, I checked the photo. The overlook appeared clearly. The valley, the fog, the empty cliff, and behind me, several feet back on the trail, the man stood facing the camera. His face remained turned away, watching me instead. My hands trembled slightly as I zoomed in. He hadn't been there when I took the picture, yet the image showed him close enough to touch, standing exactly where I had been moments earlier, facing me, still unmoving, still silent. The longer I stared at the image, the stronger the feeling grew. He had never been looking at the valley. He had been waiting for someone else to arrive. And now, he knew I had seen him. Clouds gathered by afternoon, dimming the sky into a soft gray ceiling. The forest felt heavier again. I walked without checking the photograph another time, though I felt its presence in my pocket, like a quiet secret. The trail narrowed into dense woods where visibility dropped quickly. Branches brushed against my sleeves, damp leaves leaving cold marks against my skin. That was when I heard the static, a faint crackle. At first, I thought it came from insects hidden in the undergrowth. Then it repeated, short bursts of interference, mechanical and uneven. I stopped walking. The sound continued. I searched my backpack until I found the small handheld radio I carried for emergencies. I hadn't turned it on since arriving, yet the speaker flickered with noise. Static whispered through it. I lifted it closer. The crackling shifted into fragments of voices. Soft, calm, almost conversational. Still walking. The signal broke apart again. Trail keeps going. I froze. The voices sounded distant, as if carried through layers of fog rather than airwaves. I adjusted the dial slowly. More voices emerged. Men, women, different ages. None sounded frightened. They spoke quietly, like travelers describing scenery to someone beside them. Camp should be nearby. Don't rush. It gets easier deeper in. A chill moved through me. These weren't rescue calls. No urgency. No panic. Only acceptance. I pressed the radio closer. Hello? I whispered. Static surged loudly, drowning my voice. Then one reply came through clearly. You found it too. The signal steadied. A woman's voice spoke gently, almost relieved. We thought no one else could hear us. I asked where they were. A pause followed. Then several voices answered together. Further in. Coordinates followed. Numbers spoken carefully. Repeated twice. I wrote them down quickly. When I checked my map, the location didn't exist. The coordinates pointed beyond marked terrain, somewhere past the mountain's highest ridge. The radio crackled again. Night began approaching. As darkness settled, the voices grew clearer. More joined the conversation. Some discussed weather conditions that didn't match the sky above me. Others mentioned landmarks I had never seen. Towers, shelters, rivers absent from any map. One voice sounded familiar. I listened closer. It took several seconds to realize why. The speaker described the overlook. The man at the cliff. My arrival. They were describing me. I stepped back instinctively. How do you know that? I asked. Static surged violently. The voices faded. Only one remained. Calm. Patient. You'll understand when you stay longer. The radio went silent. No signal remained. Only faint background hum. I turned it off. Yet for the rest of the evening, I felt certain something continued transmitting. Not through the device, but through the mountain itself. Night fell gently, wrapped in thin drifting fog. The trail ran along a steep slope, overlooking dense forest far below. Darkness gathered quickly between the lower trees, turning the landscape into layers of shadow. That was when I saw the light. A lantern moved through the forest beneath me. Small, warm, steady. It traveled parallel to the trail, weaving effortlessly between trees despite terrain too steep for easy walking. I stopped. The lantern stopped. Its glow never flickered. No swinging motion. No change in brightness. Just constant golden light, hovering among black trunks. I continued walking. The lantern moved again, keeping perfect pace several meters below. Curiosity replaced caution. I stepped off the trail and began descending carefully through thick brush, branches tugging at my clothes as I followed the light downward. The air grew colder, the forest quieter. The lantern waited ahead. Eventually, I reached a small clearing hidden beneath towering pines. An abandoned campsite rested there. A tent stood perfectly intact. A cooking pot hung above cold ashes. Sleeping bags lay neatly arranged as though their owners had stepped away briefly. Dust covered everything. Nothing had been touched in years. Yet the lantern burned brightly at the center of camp. No fuel source. No handle. Just light. I approached slowly. The flame didn't move even when I passed beside it. The campsite felt frozen in time, untouched by decay, untouched by weather. A mug rested beside the fire ring, filled halfway with hardened tea. A pair of boots stood beside the tent entrance, waiting. I realized then that the lantern wasn't guiding me somewhere. It had been waiting for recognition. I nodded instinctively toward it. The flame brightened slightly, then dimmed. Satisfied, the light began moving again, drifting deeper into the forest before fading completely between trees. The clearing darkened instantly. I stood alone beside a campsite that felt paused between moments. After a long silence, I climbed back toward the trail. When I reached it, the red markers glowed faintly ahead, and for the first time, I wondered how many travelers had followed lights into the mountain and never returned to tell anyone what they found waiting below. The next day began without transition. No clear memory of sleep, only walking. The trail descended steadily downhill, winding between moss-covered rocks and damp soil. Gravity pulled gently at my steps, suggesting progress toward lower ground. I walked for hours. The sky above remained unchanged, Pale clouds arranged in identical shapes drifting slowly across the same patch of blue. Eventually, I passed a large split boulder beside the trail. Its surface was marked by white lichen shaped like a crescent moon. I noticed it casually, then forgot about it, until I saw it again. The same rock, same crescent mark, same angle of light. I stopped, turned around. The trail behind me looked unfamiliar, yet unmistakably identical to the path ahead. I continued walking. Minutes later, the rock appeared again. My breathing quickened. Time felt stretched, soft around the edges. The forest repeated itself. Trees positioned just slightly too familiar, shadows falling in identical patterns. Even the clouds above hadn't moved. I checked my watch. The second hand ticked normally, but nothing else changed. Panic rose slowly. I walked faster. The trail returned me to the rock again. And again, hours passed in side repetition. Exhaustion set in without progress. Finally, near the base of the boulder, I noticed carving etched into stone. Words I hadn't seen before. Stop walking. The letters looked old, edges softened by time. I hesitated. The idea felt absurd. Yet I obeyed. I stood completely still. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The forest shifted almost imperceptibly. Wind returned. Leaves rustled softly for the first time all day. Clouds finally moved across the sky. When I stepped forward again, the rock did not return. The loop had ended, and I understood something quietly terrifying. The mountain didn't trap movement. It trapped momentum. Only stillness allowed escape. Fog arrived without warning. One moment the trail remained clear. The next, thick white mist swallowed everything beyond a few feet. Sound dulled instantly. Even my footsteps felt distant. I walked slowly, arms slightly extended to avoid unseen obstacles. Then I heard my name, spoken softly from somewhere ahead. I froze. The voice sounded familiar. A friend from years ago, someone who lived far from this mountain. Over here. Another voice called from behind. A different memory. A different person. Each voice carried personal details. Fragmented conversations only I should remember. They came from every direction. Gentle, inviting. I turned toward one. The fog thickened immediately. Visibility shrank further, pressing close around me. Another voice called from the left, warmer, kinder. I took a step toward it. The fog deepened again. Breathing became harder. The mountain felt smaller, closing inward. I stopped moving. The voices continued, growing more urgent, more familiar, more comforting. But I noticed something. Whenever I stood still, the fog stopped thickening. When I moved toward any voice, it closed tighter. Understanding came slowly. The voices wanted attention, recognition. Following them only pulled me deeper into blindness. So I closed my eyes and listened to nothing. The voices faded gradually, disappointed. Silence returned. When I opened my eyes again, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing the trail ahead. Clear, unchanged, safe only when ignored. I walked forward without answering another call. And behind me, faint whispers lingered in the mist, voices learning my memories, waiting for another chance to be followed. Morning light revealed something new beside the trail. A pile of stones, neatly stacked. It hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of that. Flat rocks formed a low mound, arranged carefully as if marking a grave. Fresh flowers rested on top, pale mountain blossoms untouched by frost. No footprints surrounded it, no tools, no sign of who placed them there. I circled slowly. The air felt colder near the stones. A quiet heaviness settled over me, like standing inside a memory that didn't belong to me. I asked passing hikers later that morning if they had seen it. Each one shook their head. Some claimed no grave existed along this trail at all. That night, sleep came quickly, and I dreamed. I stood beneath heavy weight. Darkness pressed from all sides. Stone rested above my chest, cold and unmoving. Dirt filled the air, thick and silent. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Yet I felt calm, as if waiting was expected. I woke before dawn, heart steady rather than racing. Compelled, I returned to the grave. Fresh footprints circled it endlessly. dozens of overlapping steps forming a perfect ring. None led away, only around, and around, and around. The flowers remained untouched, the stones undisturbed. As I stood there, a quiet realization settled into me like morning fog. Somewhere on this mountain, something was being remembered, and something else was waiting patiently to be replaced. Storm clouds gathered without warning, heavy and low over the ridgeline. The wind returned suddenly, pushing through the trees with force that made branches groan and bend. Cold rain began to fall in thin, steady sheets, soaking the trail within minutes. Visibility dropped fast. I kept walking. The storm felt unnatural, not violent, just controlled, like something carefully turned on above the forest. Then I saw him. A ranger stood beside a small trail junction, holding a flashlight angled toward the ground. His uniform was dark green, clean despite the rain. A radio hung at his shoulder, untouched by water. He looked up as I approached. "Trail closes after this point," he said calmly. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. I hesitated. "There's no shelter nearby." He nodded once, as if that was expected. "Then you shouldn't be here." The flashlight beam shifted slightly. That's when I noticed it. No shadow followed him. The rain fell around him, but the ground beneath remained unchanged. No silhouette, no dark shape beneath his feet, just empty light. I blinked. When I looked again, his shadow appeared briefly, then disappeared again like a mistake. "You're alone out here?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "No one is ever alone here," he replied. A sudden crack of thunder rolled through the valley. I glanced away for just a moment. When I looked back, the ranger was gone. No footsteps in the wet soil. No fading shape in the rain. Only the flashlight remained, standing upright against a tree, still turned on. The storm continued through the night. Yet something felt off, like time had bent slightly. Morning arrived too quickly. The rain stopped instantly. The forest was dry, as if nothing had happened at all. I checked the trail junction again. No ranger station existed there. No marks, no signs, no path intersection. Even the ground looked undisturbed. Later, I asked hikers farther down the trail about the storm. None remembered it, but my jacket was still damp, and the flashlight was gone. By midday, the trail led into a dense cluster of old pine trees. The air here felt older somehow, heavier, like it had been left untouched for years without moving. That's where I found a cabin. Small, wooden, half hidden beneath overgrown branches. Smoke should have been coming from the chimney, but there was none. Still, something about it felt recently used. I stepped inside carefully. Warmth greeted me immediately, too warm for an abandoned structure. Inside, carved initials covered every wall. Hundreds of them, scratched into wood at different depths, different times. Some fresh, some nearly erased. I ran my fingers across one set of letters. They were still slightly rough. Recent. Then I saw it. My name, carved into the far wall. Clean, deep, perfectly formed. My breath caught. I had never been here before. Yet the carving looked older than I felt. A rocking chair creaked slowly in the corner, moving on its own, not violently, just gently swaying, as if someone had just stood up from it. Dust covered the floor, thick and undisturbed except for a single path leading from the door to the center of the room. Many footsteps had walked that path before. Too many. The cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a memory repeated endlessly. I backed toward the door. The rocking chair stopped. Complete silence filled the space. Then, softly, the chair moved again. One slow creak, as if acknowledging my presence, as if welcoming someone who had finally returned. I left quickly, but even outside, the feeling stayed. That I hadn't discovered the cabin, only remembered it too late. Night fell without color. No sunset, no gradual shift, just sudden darkness, settling over the forest like a curtain. The ground felt different here, softer, slightly warm beneath my boots. At first, I thought it was fatigue playing tricks on me. Then I felt it again, a low vibration, not from the air, from below. A hum moved through the soil, slow and rhythmic, like something breathing underneath the mountain. I stopped walking. The hum stopped too. Complete silence followed. Too complete. I knelt, pressing my hand against the earth. Cold, still, ordinary. Then the sound returned. Deeper this time. Carried through bone more than air. Far ahead, faint movement appeared between trees. Shapes. Hikers. Walking slowly. Eyes closed. Not awake. They moved together in quiet coordination, stepping without hesitation toward a clearing deeper in the forest. I followed at a distance. The hum grew stronger with every step. The hikers gathered around a cluster of buried stones, arranged in a circle. Each person stood perfectly still once they arrived, as if responding to something beneath them. Their breathing aligned. One rhythm. Shared. I called out softly. No response. The moment my voice entered the air, the humming stopped instantly. Every head turned toward me at once, then froze again. I stepped back. The forest went silent. The hikers returned to their slow movement moments later, as if nothing had happened. The hum resumed, stronger now, patient, as if the mountain was testing whether I would interrupt again. I left before it noticed twice. But even far away, I could still feel it beneath my feet, waiting, listening, breathing through stone. The camera appeared at my feet just after sunrise. I hadn't dropped it. I didn't remember carrying it. But it was there, small, black, slightly scratched, resting on the trail like it had been placed carefully for me to find. Inside were photos. I opened them slowly. The first image showed the forest trail behind me. Empty. The second showed me walking. But the angle was wrong, as if someone stood just behind my shoulder while taking it. I flipped through more. Every image contained me, sometimes alone, sometimes with blurred figures behind trees, always unaware. Then I noticed something disturbing. The timestamps. They didn't match the day. Some were dated years earlier, others days I had not yet lived. My hands tightened around the camera. The final photo made me stop completely. It showed the trail ahead. Sunlight breaking through trees. A clear sky, and me standing in it. But the timestamp read tomorrow. I dropped the camera. It didn't break. It simply lay there waiting, as if it had already captured what would happen next. I didn't pick it up again. Yet later that evening, when I checked my bag, it was inside again. I reached what should have been the trailhead just after midnight. The forest ended abruptly. No gradual transition. Just darkness giving way to a wide open clearing. And something that should not have been there. Cars. Dozens of them. Parked neatly in rows across uneven ground. Old models. Rusted frames. Dust-covered windows. Some looked decades abandoned. Yet their engines ticked softly. Cooling, as if recently shut off. I stepped closer. Keys hung from ignition switches. In many of them, dangles of metal swaying slightly in still air. None of the vehicles belonged to modern travelers. None looked recent, but they all felt used recently. The clearing had no official road markers. No signs of civilization beyond this point. Just vehicles waiting in silence. I walked between them carefully. One windshield reflected my movement. Then another, and another. Inside some cars, faint shapes sat in driver's seats. Still, unmoving, not sleeping, not alive in any familiar way. I turned away quickly. The forest behind me was gone. Not blocked, not hidden, gone. Only darkness remained where the trail should have been. I checked my compass. It spun slowly, then stopped pointing north. It pointed back toward the cars. All of them, at once. A quiet realization settled in. The mountain didn't end here. It only changed what it kept. Arrivals were visible. Departures were not. And as I stood among those silent vehicles, I understood something I couldn't explain. None of these travelers had ever truly left, and I was no longer certain I had arrived. Night returned without warning. No sunset, no gradual fading. Just a forest slipping into darkness, as if someone turned a switch inside the sky. I kept moving. The trail climbed again, cutting along a steep ridge where wind moved freely through open space. The air here felt colder, sharper, carrying the faint taste of stone and distance. That's when I noticed the light. Far ahead, a small flicker above the tree line. It blinked once, Then again, slow, patient, almost rhythmic. I stopped walking. The light did not stop. I raised my head higher, scanning the ridgeline. There was no structure visible at first, only black silhouettes of trees and rock against the sky. But the light continued, a fire lookout, or something that resembled one. I checked my map. Nothing marked this location. No tower, no structure, no name. Still, the light blinked again, as if confirming I was looking at it correctly. I began walking toward it. The distance should have taken hours, yet the trail seemed to shorten itself with every step. Trees thinned too quickly. Rocks aligned unnaturally. Time felt compressed, folded inward like paper. The light grew closer. Then, suddenly I was there. A wooden tower stood in silence above the ridge. Old, weathered, empty, its windows dark except for the blinking light at the top. I climbed. Each step creaked softly under my weight, but the sound felt delayed, like it belonged to someone else climbing behind me. At the top, a single room waited. No furniture except a chair facing outward into endless darkness. No maps, no radios. Only that light switch blinking slowly near the window. I approached it. The light turned off. Silence deepened instantly. Then it turned on again, without touch, without movement, as if responding to my presence alone. I looked out the window. The forest below stretched endlessly, but something felt wrong with its depth. Distances didn't align. Shapes repeated faintly in layers, like reflections overlapping themselves. I turned back. The chair was now slightly closer to the window. I hadn't heard it move. I didn't move it. The light blinked again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw someone sitting in the chair, not facing me, facing the window, waiting for me to notice. Then it was empty again. The tower felt less like a structure and more like an observation point that had never stopped watching. I left quickly, but the blinking light followed me in memory longer than the trail did. Morning never arrived properly. Only dim, uncertain light filtering through heavy clouds. The trail sloped downward now, deeper into a section of forest that felt denser than before. The air warmed strangely as I descended, an unsettling contrast to the higher cold ridges. Birds were gone entirely. Not quiet, absent. The deeper I went, the more the landscape resisted recognition. Trees grew too close together. Roots twisted across the path like intentional barriers. Every step forward felt slightly heavier, as if the ground preferred I stayed above. I tried turning back once. My body stopped mid-motion, not physically restrained, just delayed, like the idea of turning had to pass through something first before becoming real. I continued forward instead. The trail stretched longer than it should have. Hours passed without change in elevation or scenery. The slope never ended. At one point, I noticed markings on the trees, scratches rather than paint. Deep, repeated lines carved into bark at irregular heights. Too many to be random. They formed patterns, directionless patterns, like something learning how movement worked. The air grew warmer again, almost humid, wrong for a mountain. I wiped sweat from my forehead and realized my breath no longer formed visible mist at all. Even though the forest felt darker, something didn't match. I stopped briefly. The silence pressed in immediately. No wind, no insects, no distant movement. Just pressure. Behind me, faint resistance formed in the air, subtle, like the forest didn't want to face upward again. I didn't. I kept descending, and the mountain allowed it, too easily, as if it had been waiting for me to go deeper all along. I found the campsite by accident, or maybe it found me. Tents appeared suddenly between trees, too organized, too perfect in placement to feel natural. A small clearing open around them, shaped like a quiet circle carved into the forest. Inside the tents, shapes rested. Hikers, dozens of them, all asleep. At least that's what I thought. I stepped closer carefully. No movement, no shifting fabric, only slow, synchronized breathing drifting through the air like a single shared rhythm. Inhale, exhale, together. Every tent matched the same timing. I called softly. No response. One tent flap moved slightly in the windless air, then stopped. I approached the nearest tent and knelt beside it. Inside, a man lay on his side, eyes closed, face calm, too calm, as if sleep had never ended. I touched the fabric. Warm, still alive, but not waking. Around me, all breathing aligned again. One pattern, one pulse. The entire camp breathing as if it belonged to a single body. I stepped back quickly. The moment I did, everything stopped. Breathing vanished instantly. Total silence returned. Then, slowly it resumed, not disturbed, just continued, as if I had not interrupted anything important. I backed away from the clearing. No one followed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had almost been included in that rhythm. Almost synchronized. Almost absorbed. By morning, when I returned to check the site again, the tents were gone. Only flattened grass remained, perfectly pressed, like something had lain there for a very long time without ever waking. The canyon appeared after a sharp bend in the trail. A sudden drop in terrain revealed a deep ravine cutting through the mountain like a wound. Air moved differently here, denser, slower, carrying sound in strange ways. I called out once without thinking. My voice should have disappeared. Instead, it came back immediately, but altered. Here, it answered before I finished speaking. I froze. Then I tried again, more cautiously. Is anyone there? The echo returned instantly. Are you alone? My stomach tightened. The canyon wasn't repeating me. It was responding. I stepped closer to the edge. Fog moved below in slow layers, hiding the depth of the ravine. I called again. I'm trying to find a path. A pause. Then, it already found you. My pulse slowed strangely, like my body was listening instead of reacting. More echoes arrived, overlapping now. Different tones, different voices, each one asking something personal. Questions I had never spoken aloud. Where are you going? Why did you come here? Will you stay when it ends? I stepped back from the edge. The responses grew louder when I listened, quieter when I ignored them. I tested it. I covered my ears. Silence returned instantly, complete, clean. The canyon stopped answering. Only the wind remained. I understood then. The echo didn't repeat sound. It repeated attention, and attention made it real. I left without speaking again. But even far away, I felt the canyon waiting for the next question I would forget I asked. The bridge appeared suddenly between two cliffs. No warning signs. No approach path. Just a narrow wooden structure stretching into fog, so thick it erased everything beyond a few meters. It had no visible end, only continuation. I stepped onto it carefully. The wood creaked softly under my weight. Each step echoed downward into empty space. Halfway across, something changed. The forest behind me disappeared completely. Not hidden, gone. Only fog remained. I turned. Nothing. The bridge stretched in both directions now into identical gray nothingness. No start. No end. Just continuation. Footsteps appear behind me. Slow. Measured. Following. I turned quickly. No one was there, but the sound remained. Closer now. Breathing joined it. Soft, steady, right beside my shoulder. I did not look. The moment I considered turning fully, the bridge trembled slightly, as if reacting. I stopped moving. Immediately, the footsteps stopped too. Breathing faded. I stood still for a long time. The bridge stabilized. Fog loosened slightly. When I finally stepped forward again, the sound returned, but only behind me, never beside me. I realized something then. It wasn't following me. It was following motion itself. I walked carefully, controlling each step. The presence remained at distance, patient, never crossing the space I acknowledged. Halfway through, I stopped again. Silence. Perfect silence. I listened carefully. Nothing. I took another step forward. Breathing returned instantly. Behind me, always behind. Never visible. Never closer, unless I forgot it existed. I understood the rule, without being told. The bridge only ended when fear stopped acknowledging what followed. So I kept walking, without looking, without confirming, until finally the fog thinned ahead, and the bridge ended where I had always been too afraid to notice it would. Morning light filtered weakly through the canopy, pale and uncertain. The trail felt unchanged, yet something small waited at the edge of the path. A backpack. Mine. I knew it instantly. Same worn straps. Same faded fabric. Same small tear near the side pocket from a past trip I remembered clearly, but I had not lost it. I approached slowly. The zipper was slightly open. Inside, everything was arranged neatly, too neatly. Compartment items aligned with precision that didn't match how I packed them. My water bottle sat upright, completely dry. My map was folded in perfect symmetry. And then I noticed something new, an item I didn't recognize, a small metal compass. It wasn't mine, yet it felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. I checked the surrounding forest. Empty. No footprints leading here. No sign of anyone placing it. I left the backpack untouched and continued walking. By midday, I returned to the same spot again. The backpack was still there, unmoved, except now the zipper was fully closed. That evening, I checked again. It was gone, but when I opened my own bag later that night, it was inside again, wet with fresh dew, as if it had just been returned from somewhere I hadn't been yet. The forest changed slowly here. Trees grew older in appearance, bark thick and twisted like tired hands reaching upward. That's when I noticed one of them. It didn't resemble a tree at first glance. Its trunk bent in a way that suggested posture rather than growth, like something standing still for too long. I stopped in front of it. The bark was uneven, textured in strange patterns that almost looked like facial features. Not carved, formed. As I watched, a subtle shift moved across its surface, like an expression changing beneath wood. I stepped closer. The air around it felt heavier, not colder, just aware. At its roots, hikers had left small offerings, stones, cloth strips, notes tied with string. None looked recent, yet none looked old either, as if time didn't decide what belonged here. That night, I slept lightly near the trail and dreamed of the tree. It stood exactly as it did in reality, but taller, watching, not moving, just observing departures that never fully left. When I woke, the tree had changed slightly. Its face now faced my direction more precisely. I moved camps, but even from distance, I felt it continuing to look, not with hostility, with memory, like it was learning how long I would remain before becoming part of its landscape. The trail narrowed into a quiet passage of stone and low branches. No wind moved here. No sound traveled properly. Even my footsteps felt muted, swallowed before they could echo. Then I saw it, a single trail marker, white wood, no symbols, only one word carved into its surface. Continue. There was no arrow, no direction, only instruction. I looked around. Every possible path branched outward, but each one curved subtly back toward the same marker when I shifted my perspective. I tested it. Left path, returned. Right path, returned. Forward, returned. It didn't matter where I went. Everything led back here. I stood still for a long time. The forest did not pressure me. It simply waited, like it had already seen every choice I might attempt. Something inside me loosened slowly. Not fear, not relief, just understanding. The idea of direction no longer applied. I stepped closer to the marker. The wood felt warm, almost alive. The word continue seemed less like instruction now, and more like recognition, as if it already knew I would not stop. I walked forward, and this time, the path did not return me. It accepted me. Night no longer arrived with clarity. It seeped in slowly, dissolving color from the world, until everything became shades of gray and deep shadow. The sky above the ridge emptied first. Stars faded without falling. The wind stopped entirely. No rustle, no movement, no distance between silence and presence. The mountain felt awake, not metaphorically, not emotionally, awake in the way something becomes aware of being observed. I climbed higher without remembering choosing to. The trail had become less of a path and more of a suggestion in the ground. Faint impressions guided me forward. At times, I recognized places I had already passed, but altered slightly, Trees stood in reverse positions. Rocks faced inward instead of outward, like memories rearranged incorrectly. Then I saw it, fragments of earlier moments replaying subtly across the landscape. A lantern glow beneath trees, a flicker of a tower light, footsteps forming where I stood. Not memories in my mind, memories in the mountain, as if everything that had happened here remained embedded in its surface. I stopped walking. The silence deepened further, and I understood something that didn't arrive like thought, but like weight settling into place. The trail was not leading me anywhere. It was collecting me. Each step, each encounter, each moment of attention, becoming part of something larger that did not end when I stopped noticing it. The mountain did not forget. It preserved, not places, not paths, but experience itself, waiting to be walked again. And as I stood beneath the empty sky, I felt it quietly acknowledging that I had noticed too much. The beginning of the trail returned without warning. Same archway, same damp soil, same silence that felt older than sound. I stood at the place where everything had started, but it no longer felt like a starting point. Only a return. Ahead, at the bend in the path, the figure stood again. The same presence from the first day, still facing away, still motionless. I approached slowly. The forest did not react. No wind, no animal movement, no resistance, just quiet acceptance. When I reached the figure, it did not turn, but I realized something unsettling. It was not facing the valley this time. It was facing me, even without moving, even without shifting. It mirrored me perfectly, not like reflection, like continuation. I stepped back. It stepped forward, matching exactly. No delay, no difference. The realization formed slowly, unavoidable now. Every version of me that had walked this trail remained somewhere within it, not gone, not lost, held, preserved. The mountain did not take travelers. It divided them. I stood there for a long time. Then the figure raised its hand slightly, not greeting, not warning, just acknowledgement, as if offering a choice that was never truly a choice. To leave would mean forgetting. To stay would mean becoming part of what the trail remembered. The forest waited, patient, infinite, and in that final silence I understood what was seen on this mountain trail was never meant to end, only to continue, again and again and again,